today's lecture. In today's lecture, we will be studying how to automate common AWS tasks using Python scripts. And our focus for the lecture of today will be to automate the creation of an AWS volume and its snapshot using Python scripts. An AWS volume is a virtual hard drive that you can use to attach, that it can be attached to an EC2 instance, right? It's a virtual hard drive that can be attached to an EC2 instance. And a snapshot that we'll also create in this our lecture will also be used. It's like a snapshot is backup of the AWS volume that you created, right? And it's being stored in an S3 bucket. So we are going to create this AWS volume and its snapshot using Python script, and we are going to automate the process. Okay, but before we start writing our Python script, right, we will need a Python library that is going to allow us to interact with our AWS console, right? That will allow us, or that will allow our Python script to interact with our AWS console, because we cannot just write a Python script and you expect that Python script to just magically be interacting with our AWS console, right? We will need a library that will allow us, or that will allow our Python script to interact with our AWS console, and that library is called Boto3 library. This is a library that allows us to interact, or that allows our Python script to interact with our AWS console. We are going to install this Boto3 library on our local computer where we will be writing our Python script. So before we want to install the Boto3 library, we will first need to install the Python programming language. But so far so good, in my local system or in my local computer, I've installed my Python programming language, and I've also set the path. So if I go to my bash, to my git bash, this is my git bash, and if I want to check if I've installed my Python programming language, I can just type python -- version, and it shows that I'm having a Python with version 3.12.6. It shows that I'm already having my Python programming language installed in my local computer. So we can just clear the screen, right? So from here I can continue to install my Boto3 library, and the command for us to install our Boto3 library using our git bash is, we just type the command pip install Boto3, right? And we click on enter. But it shows that requirement already satisfied, Boto3 in this path, right? It shows that Boto3 has been installed in my local computer, and when you go to this path, you find my Boto3 library installed. You find it in this path, right? So now we have installed our Boto3 library in our local computer. We will need to configure our local computer to have access to our AWS console. First, Boto3, right? Boto3 allows us to interact with AWS services, right? It allows our Python scripts to interact with AWS services. That's why we need to install the Boto3, which is a Python library or Python SDK. But we are going to write that Python script on our local machine or on our local computer. So we need to grant access of our local computer to our AWS console, right? We need to configure our local computer to have access with our AWS console. So our local computer can be talking with our AWS console, right? And for us to do that, we will need to install a tool called AWS CLI. And if you want to check if the package has been installed successfully in your local computer, you just type AWS configure. AWS -- version. Okay. You will see that AWS CLI, which is AWS command line interface, has been installed on my local computer, right? So now I can configure my local computer to have access with my AWS console. And how are we going to do that, right? How are we going to configure our local computer or our AWS CLI, which will grant us access to our AWS console, right? We will need to go to our AWS console. We need to go to our AWS console and create a user. And for us to create a user, we will need to come to the IAM service. We click on the IAM service, and from here we click on users, and we click on create new user. We can call this user AWS _CLI user, because this is the user that we are going to use to configure our AWS CLI installed in our local machine. We are going to give this user certain permissions on our AWS console, and we are going to use this user to configure our AWS CLI installed in our local machine, so that our local machine, right, will have access to those permissions that we have given to this user we are creating right now, right? So we click on next, and here we click on attach policies directly. And since we are going to use this user to configure our AWS CLI, or to configure our local computer, and that's our local computer, we are going to use our local computer to write Python scripts, right? That is going to automate certain services on our very AWS console. So we need to give this user administrator access, right? So that the user can have access to everything on our AWS console. So we click on the administrator access, and we scroll down, and we click on next. You see my cursor, this is my cursor, and if we go down, I'm sure my image is blocking this button. There's a button here, next. We click on next, right? We can review our user. We check the username and everything, and if everything is set, everything is okay, we just scroll down and we click on create user. There is also another button. If you see my cursor here, there's also another button called create user. We click there, right? and our AWS CLI user has been created. We will need certain security credentials, right, that is going to allow us to have access to our AWS console using our local computer or our local machine. When we click on this user that we have created or that we created, we click on the user, and inside here you will see this tab called security credentials. You click on this security credentials and you scroll down, you see a button or you see a section called create access keys. We click on this create access keys, and we want to give our local computer access using the command line interface, because in our local computer we have already downloaded and installed AWS command line interface. So through that command line interface, that's where we want to grant our local computer access to our AWS console. So we will need to choose this command line interface. We select this button and we scroll down. We come to this checkbox here, I understand the above recommendation. You click here and you click on next, right? From here you click on create access keys. So now our access key has been created, right? So we will need, this is the access key, or this is the credentials, or this is the information that we will need now to configure our local computer or our local machine using AWS CLI, right? So when we come back to our bash shell, when we come back to our git bash, right, we can just clear the screen, and since we are using AWS CLI to configure our local machine to our AWS console, the AWS CLI is having certain commands that we can use to configure. It's having certain commands that we can use in the configuration process, and the command that we will need to use to do the configuration is AWS configure. So when we type AWS configure and we click on enter, now the AWS CLI is going to ask us the access key. This access key that is going to ask us, we are going to go back to our AWS console and we copy this access key by clicking this button here, and we come back to our git bash and we paste it here by using shift insert, and we click enter. Now AWS also, through the AWS CLI, through the AWS command line, is also asking the secret access key, right? We come here again to our console, we click on this secret key, we can click on show, but this information is very vital, so we don't compromise with this information. I'm just clicking show now because I will delete this user after the lecture. So we click on copy and we go back to our git bash and we paste it here by using shift insert, and we click on enter. Now they are asking us the default region, so in which region our AWS console is found, right? Now we go back to our console and you will see that the region that where our AWS console is found is US East 1, right? You just copy it here, you can just copy it here, and you come back to our git bash and you paste it using shift insert, click on OK, you click on enter, and the default output, you can leave this default output like that, but you can also use an output format of JSON. So you type JSON here and you click enter. So now our AWS configuration is done. We have configured our local computer with our AWS console. So now when we are writing our scripts, our Python scripts to automate certain services on our AWS console, we have that access now to talk directly from our local computer to our AWS console. Now, as the configuration is complete, what we need to do now is to go to our Python IDE, where we will start writing our Python script in order to automate our AWS services. And the AWS services that we are going to automate in this lecture is the creation of an EBS volume and its snapshot. So this is my IDE where I will be writing my Python code or my Python script. So for us to start writing our Python script to automate that creation of the EBS volume, our AWS services. And what's the name of the library? You get it correct. The Boto3 library. Because that's a Python library that allows us to interact, that allows our Python script to interact with our AWS services. So after we must have imported our Boto3 library, what we will need to do next is to open our AWS management console. When we talk of opening our AWS management console, what do we mean is, for example, if we go to our browser, if we go to our Chrome browser, and if we want to open our AWS console in our Chrome browser, they are going to prompt us to give our username and password. And after we have keyed in our username and password and we are authenticated, they will lock us into our AWS console, and this page will be open. So this page is called the AWS management console, because in this page you can manage all the services that is running in our AWS console. So we need to open this same AWS management console where we can manage all our services in our Python script. So we need to go back, or let's go back to our PyCharm or our IDE, and we open the AWS management console in our PyCharm. So let's open the AWS management console in our Python script. So we call the Boto3 library session with capital letter, and you pass in the profile name of default. The profile name of default. This profile name default that we have passed. Sorry for the noise. My neighbors' children and my neighbors are really disturbing. So this profile name that we have passed in as a string is the profile that is the default profile that was created when we were configuring our AWS CLI. When we use the command AWS configure to key in our credentials, our security credentials from our AWS console, a default profile is being created, and this default profile is where we pass here, so that we can have this default profile is what we have passed here, that it will enable us to open the AWS management console right in our Python script. So after we must have opened our AWS management console, we need to save it into a variable. I call it AWS management console. You can name it anything you want, but I love to use a proper naming convention so that I know my variable, each of my variable that I'm using. So we have opened our AWS management console in our Python script. So what we need to do next is to open our EC2 console. Why are we opening our EC2 console? In today's lecture, we know that we will focus on the creation of EBS volume, to automate the creation. That's our focus, to automate the creation of EBS volume. And we know that the EBS volume is found in the EC2 service, or in the EC2 console. Like when we go to our browser again, and we click on the EC2, we click on the EC2 service. When we click on this EC2 service to open the EC2 service or to open the EC2 console, this other page will open, and it's in this page, it's in this EC2 service that we can be able to create our elastic block store volume and its snapshot. So we also need to open this same EC2 console or this same EC2 service in our Python script. We will need to open it in our Python script, and for us to open it in our Python script, we will need our AWS management console. That's what we will need to open first. Then from the AWS management console, now we can go into there and we can click the EC2 button to open the EC2 console. So in our Python script, we'll call the AWS management console that we have saved in this variable, the one that we have opened, dot client, and we need to pass the service that we want to open, the specific service that we want to open. In our case, we want to open the EC2 service, so we need to pass it as a string. So we pass EC2, this is a service name that we want to open from our AWS management console. And we all know that EC2 service always, when you want to work with an EC2 service, is always proper to give the region where you want to work in with your EC2 service, right? So we need to pass in the region also, because it's proper to always give that region. If you go to our browser and want to work with the EC2 service, we realize that there is a region that has been specified already. A region that has been specified already for us to work with our EC2 service. So we need to also specify that region in our Python script. So we need to specify region name, and we pass it as a string also, which is, we can give our US is 1. That's the region name that we will need to specify when we are working with our EC2 instance. So now our EC2 console is now open, right? So we need to save it in another variable. I can call it I call it EC2 console. You can call it whatever, but like I earlier said, I like to use proper naming convention. So now we have opened our AWS console, and through our AWS console we have opened our EC2 service or our EC2 console. From there we can proceed now in writing our script to automate the creation of an ABS volume. So for us to write our script, what we will need to do, because all this code that I just wrote now is not rocket science. Before I want to work on any service on AWS, I'll do a proper research. And where do I do that research? I'll go to the Boto3 documentation and I'll do a proper research on what service that I want to work on. I'll go to the documentation and I will do a proper research on the service that I want to work on. The service that I want to work on or to automate in this our lecture is to automate the creation of ABS volume. And we know that the ABS volume is found in an EC2 console or in an EC2 service. So we need to do a proper research on how we can use the Boto3 library to open or to create an ABS volume. So when we go back to our browser, like I earlier said, it's not rocket science. You need to do a proper research. After you must have done your research, then you come back and continue your code, continue writing your code. So when we go to our browser and we go and we just search let's say Boto3 documentation, and you click, you see the first link AWS, the first link boto3.aws.amazon.aws.com. You click on that link. Okay, our Boto3 documentation now is open. So in our lecture today, what we want to do is found in our EC2 service, right, which is the creation of what? Elastic block store. You can just use Control F and we type EC2. Just type, we use Ctrl F and just type EC2. Right, you see that EC2 is now open. You can click here and you open the EC2 page on how to do certain methods and work on how we can work on our EC2 our EC2 service. So there are so many methods, right, how we can do as you said, IBAN, so many attached volume, so many methods that we can work on. But what we are interested in is to create an ABS volume. So we need to search where to create an ABS volume. So here we see creating a snapshot. This is one of the methods that we want to do. This is one of the automation that we want to do to create a snapshot. And we'll scroll down again. You will see creation, how to create volume. This is another method that we use. So first we need to because you need to create a volume before you create the snapshot of that volume. You cannot just create a snapshot where there is no volume. So first of all need to create that volume before we create the snapshot. So when we click here to see the method, to see how we would need to create that volume, how we need to automate the creation of that volume in our AWS console, you will see this information is now displayed. So you see ec2.client.create volume. You see that there's a method called create volume. This is what we are going to use, and this is a requested syntax on how we can write the code in our Python script. So what we need is the availability zone. We need the most important ones. You can put all these ones, but the most important one that we need for this our lecture is the availability zone. Right, we need the availability zone. We need the size, and we will need the volume type. So this is a 3 parameter that we will need to pass. And when we scroll down, we can see an example on how we can write the code. We will scroll down. This is an example, right? So we can just copy this example, and we come to our PyCharm, and when we are going to define 4 functions. Each of those functions, right, they will contain its block of code that they are going to perform different tasks, right? They contains block of code that are going to perform different tasks, right? For example, we'll write a function to create ABS volume. That function's own task is to create just that ABS volume. We'll also write a function to wait for the creation of the ABS volume. You know, in our console, in our browser, when we open our console through our browser, when we come and open our console through our browser, and when we create a volume through our console, that volume will be created. The status of that volume will be pending. If we go to our console and we create a volume, for example, let's just do this like an example. We can click on create volume, and we just use general purpose tool. We can give 10 gig of RAM or 10 gig size. Yes, we can give 10 gigabyte of size. We can just give the zone US. So this one is just it's just an example. So when I click on create volume, right? Sorry, I ran out of network. I don't know why my laptop keeps disconnecting. I'm trying to connect, always keep disconnecting. I don't know why, especially when I'm connecting with my phone, my iPhone. So we have clicked on create volume, and you see that the volume states in this our volume that we have created. This is a volume that we have created. Let me delete these other ones. Let me delete these other ones. Let me delete these ones. Okay, you will see that after we have created this volume in our browser, using our console in our browser, you see that okay, the volume state has changed from it was first of all pending. It has changed from pending to now available. So this we can see this visually in our console, because is graphical, is you can see it is now we are using graphical user interface where we can see it, right? But when we are writing it in our Python script, this information we cannot see the information in our Python script. We won't know if this volume that we have created is available or still in a pending state. So we need to create another function where it's going to notify us when the volume that we have created is available. It's not in a pending state, it's now available. So after it has that function has notified us that that volume has been created or is available. Now from there we can proceed now in creating a snapshot out of that volume. Same as when you create a volume, you will need to wait for some time for it to be available, for the state of the volume to change from creating to available. When we create our snapshot also, right, the state will also be creating. So we also need that waiter function will also define another function where it's going to notify us if our snapshot is available. Then we will know that our services that we want to create, that we want to automate, is now running perfectly. So we can just go to our AWS console and check if all the services have been created successfully. So we will need to write 4 functions. The one of the function is to create the ABS volume. The other function is to wait for the ABS volume to be available. It's going to notify us, and after it has notified us, we will create now a snapshot where we will create another. We will need to define another function where it's going to create the snapshot for us, and after we have created a snapshot, we also need to wait for that snapshot to be available. So that's the 4 functions that we will need to create. And each of those 4 functions that we need to create, for example, we have done our research on how to create a volume. So when we create our first function, which is we define our function, create, this is just also a good naming convention, ABS volume, right? We define that function, and that function will take in as a parameter. We take up a parameter of availability zone. We're taking the parameter of availability zone. Size, because those are the 3 things that we need to pass, and what, the volume type. Those are the parameters that it's going to take. Let me see if there's a typo. Availability, okay. Availability zone. Okay, so this our first function is going to take these 3 parameters. We have done our research on how to create the ABS volume, the methods in which we will use to create the ABS volume. Let's copy this and come here. The one that I copied down is to create a snapshot. Is a method to create a snapshot. So let me just copy this and paste it here. Okay, we simply change this one with this EC2 console that we have opened. EC2 console, and we pass this parameter as an argument here, pass this as an argument here. The size also, pass it as an argument here, pass it as an argument in this parameter size. And the volume type, we do the same, just copy and we paste it here. Good. To start writing the code, we first need to import that library. So import the library. Can just import the library by using the syntax import Boto3 library.